No Longer Human is a book translated to English by Donald Keene. Originally written by Osamu Dazai in 1948, the book is Japan's second most selling novel. The title in Japanese is actually Ningen Shikaku, which directly translates to disqualified as human. The novel is narrated in first person, following our protagonist, Obayozu, and recurring themes within his life, such as suicide, depression, alienation, and estrangement. No Longer Human is divided into 3 notebooks, and they are all at different points in Obayozu's life. Here is our story. Our story begins with the narrator describing 3 pictures, later revealed to be the man in the photos, Yozu. One picture is of a young boy, one of him slightly older, and then one as an adult. The narrator is almost disgusted by these photos, and is unable to recognize any of the figures as human. Later we begin the first of the 3 notebooks, in which we find out that Yozu had never really understood humans. He could not comprehend why they do what they do, and believed them to be extremely greedy and selfish. From an early age, Yozu feels depressed, and another reason Yozu struggles is because several members of his family's waitstaff had sexually abused him, and Yozu felt like he could not tell anyone. Obayozu is incredibly ashamed of his view on life, and therefore puts his clown act on for others to conceal how he really views the world. Yozu would do anything to make people laugh at him, so they would look away and look no further into his character. However, one day on the playground, Yozu purposely falls off monkey bars, and as planned, his classmates erupt into laughter, though a boy named Takeichi comes up to Yozu and whispers, "You did that on purpose." Those words had sent a shiver down Yozu's spine, and as someone had been able to see right through his mask. As a result, Yozu decides to become close friends with Takeichi. That way he can keep a close eye on him. One day, Takeichi shows Yozu a self-portrait Van Gogh had made. However, in the painting was a ghost. This had deeply resonated with Yozu, and he realized that art is not meant to admire the beauty in the world, however, be a depiction of its horrors. This prompts Yozu to start drawing, and he also makes disturbing drawings, though he shows no one other than Takeichi. The story basically continues on as Yozu progresses through adulthood, and his life with school and those around him. Yozu meets a man in art school named Hariki, who gets him into a life of drinking, smoking, and regular meetings with prostitutes. It is important to note that Yozu feels he can be himself around the prostitutes, as he does not view them or value them as humans. Even with the newfound friendship, Yozu does not actually even like Hariki. He just enjoys that he can finally listen and won't have to speak, since Hariki does all the talking. He also valued Hariki as a good guide around Tokyo, after Yozu had been expelled from his university there. His new friend, Hariki, also brings Yozu to Communist Party meetings, which were illegal at the time. Yozu did not even actually like any of them, or really agree. He just enjoyed listening to them explain topics in idiotic ways. One night, Yozu goes to a bar and admits he has no money, yet the barmaid Tsuneko gives him drinks on the house. The two then spend the night together. They talk about how unhappy they truly are and decide to commit suicide. They jump into a river, yet Yozu survives. He is criminally charged due to him surviving, yet is led away because of his injuries. After this, he is put under supervision of a family friend, Flatfish. Yozu's father refuses to even speak to him, yet continues to send him money. One evening, Flatfish asks Yozu what he would like to do with his life, and though he has no direction, he eventually says he'd like to be a painter, which Flatfish laughs at him for. As a result, Yozu runs away the next morning. He ends up at Hariki's house that night, and Hariki had heard about what happened with Tsuneko, so he treats Yozu coldly. Though a woman named Suzuko stops by to drop papers off to Hariki, and she feels an attraction to Yozu. Then Yozu begins to fall into an even deeper depression, so Hariki and Flatfish have an intervention in which they agree that Yozu should marry Suzuko. However, one night, Shizuko's daughter makes a comment about wanting her real father back, so Yozu leaves. He goes drinking and meets a 17-year-old girl, Yoshiko, in a bar, and he suggests the two get married, for perverted reasons that I cannot say. He gains the trust of the young girl, and it is important to note she places lots and lots of trust in people, and is extremely gullible due to her age. The two eventually do get married. However, one night, Yozu and Hariki are on the rooftop, and when Yozu goes down, he notices that Yoshiko is being taken advantage of by a random man, though Yozu just ignores it. Yozu begins to drink even more and takes a bottle of pain pills as a suicide attempt, though he wakes up 3 days later. Flatfish gives money to Yozu to take a trip to hot springs, though he spends it on alcohol and returns worse than before. Yozu then goes to a pharmacy and for some reason has an immediate connection with the elderly pharmacist who provides him with morphine. Yozu can recognize she is unhappy as well, and he begins to have an affair with her so she will give him more morphine. He then becomes a hardcore addict until he survives his second suicide attempt. As a final attempt, Hariki and Flatfish place Yozu in a mental institute where he is forced to overcome his addictions. The story ends with Yozu explaining how he had been living in the countryside for 3 years, and even though he was only 27, he looks like a much, much older man. It was hard to gather a theme from a story that was basically written as a suicide note. However, my interpretation was that Osamu Dazai wants us to realize that our perspective on the world shapes our actions and that mental health is a priority. It almost seems like Osamu Dazai is trying to have readers learn from his mistakes, and that we should understand what he did wrong and possibly change our perspectives. The most common literary element Dazai uses within this story is conflict. It is present throughout the entire book, and it feels as if every sentence Obayozu is conflicting with himself, ashamed of who he is and what he is. There is obviously conflict with other people as well. However, I believe the main conflict is within Yozu himself. His mental health plays such a big role within the story. In fact, it is the story. The story even starts off with an older Yozu looking back on pictures, still critiquing himself. Yozu cannot accept who he is, and that is why he puts on a clown act for other people, and repeatedly mentions how ashamed he is of himself throughout the story. There is also the internal conflict of Yozu, not understanding others, whether this stems from his unhealthy early interactions with people or simply his mental illness. This concept of not being able to feel accepted tears down Yozu, even as an adult. His perception does not change as he ages, and we see this in his anxiety to do certain tasks where he must interact with other people, such as buying things or riding the bus. Ultimately, this internal self-loathing gets the best of him when his second suicide attempt takes his life. We also see the external conflict with others that is equally responsible for Yozu's deteriorating mental health. As mentioned in the summary, one of Yozu's first memories is being sexually abused and not being comfortable telling anyone. This perverted his view on life as a young boy, and as an adult he began to realize how vile and disgusting those actions were, only previously accepting it as a part of life. The second major conflict is Yozu's short encounters with Takeichi, in which it was his first experience where someone could see right through his facade. This deeply shook Yozu, and he stated multiple times throughout the story that people seeing who he really is his greatest fear, which is ironic in a way when he doesn't even seem to know who he is. Another important conflict Yozu faces is with his first love interest, Tsuneko, the desperate barmaid. Throughout the story, Dazai had felt that the women were attracted to him because they could sense his despair, and in a way, subconsciously felt bad. When Yozu and this barmaid spend the night together, he for once can finally begin to understand what it means to be human. He could relate to her, yet did not feel like his mask was on. Unfortunately, the two shared similar suicidal urges, so together they jump into the river. Yet, Obayozu survives. This theme of alienation and despair leading to nothing good is exactly this example. We see directly the fact that the views the two share about this world lead to the death of a young girl with her whole life ahead of her. Towards the end of the story, when Yozu sees his new wife, Yoshiko, being taken advantage of, he does not do anything about it. This destroys Yozu even more, and he begins to drink more. When Yozu starts having an affair with the pharmacist to get more drugs, we see how his world is crumbling even more, and how Dazai is using this self-insert to show how he was a failure in his mind is just amazing. There is so much depth to the story, where Dazai shows that rather than directly telling us about his view on life, he shows us that when our view is perverted, and it's extremely harmful, and that accepting ourselves is one of the most important things that we can do. Yozu, and most likely Dazai as well, could not accept themselves, therefore leading to a difficult life for not only them, but those around them. From one point of view, we can see Yozo as the victim, burdened as a child, and not really given the right start. However, the sharp contrast is how he acts as an adult, coaxing a young woman into suicide over his selfish view, straining his family with his actions, and simply leaving partners just because he cannot understand how to deal with them. In a way, you feel bad, but he still did what he did, and the message Dazai is trying to convey is not only a cry for help, but a lesson that we must accept ourselves. Osamu Dazai, or his real name, Tsushima Tsuji, was born in Kanagi, Japan, June 19, 1909. Just like Yozo, he was born into a wealthy family. For university, Tsuji attended Hirosaki's University and had a passion for writing literature. Around 1928, Tsuji edited a series of student publications and contributed some of his own works. He also published a magazine with his friends and eventually began to work on his college's newspaper. However, when his idol writer committed suicide in 1927, Tsuji began to ignore work and his alcoholism began to run rampant. On December 10, 1929, Tsuji attempted suicide for the first time, yet survived. Tsuji did eventually graduate, and the following year he enrolled in the French Literature Department of Tokyo Imperial University. Though, Tsuji gave up studying yet again and ran off with a traditional Japanese dancer named Hatsuyo Oyama, and as a result, he was disowned by his family. 9 days after Tsuji was officially expelled from his university, he attempted suicide by drowning off a beach in Kamakura with another woman, 19-year-old bar hostess Shimeko Tanabe. Just as it happened to Yozo, Tanabe died and Tsuji survived. After more complications with his family, Tsuji settled down and began to write under the pen name Osamu Dazai. In his first short story, Resha, or Train, this is where he began to cement his first-person narrative style. Tsuji applied to a Tokyo newspaper company, yet did not get the job, so he wrote a book called The Final Years as a suicide note and tried to hang himself, though he failed again. He soon developed a serious morphine addiction, just like Yozo, and entered a mental institution. Sound familiar? When he was released, he found out his wife Hatsuyo had been cheating on him with his best friend, so the two attempted suicide by taking sleeping pills, though neither died. Tsuji then divorced her and got married to Michiko Ishihara, who had their first child, Sunako, in 1941. Tsuji continued to write stories, including one titled Gyofukuki, which means transformation in English, which contained ideas of suicide. Tsuji kept drinking and met a woman named Tomi Yamazaki. He then left his wife and kids for her and began to write No Longer Human. On June 13, 1948, Dazai and Tomi drowned themselves in the Tamagawa Canal near his house. Their bodies were not discovered until 6 days later, on June 19th, which would have been his 39th birthday. If I had the opportunity to recommend the book to someone else, I would without batting an eye. The story is so unique, and being able to see Osamu Dazai's point of view on life through a self-insert is an experience that I really appreciated. As unfortunate as his mental illness was, it was important to recognize it as I read the book, and I was able to even appreciate my life a little more. There were times when I could empathize with Obayozu, and times where I was repulsed by his actions. The book made me really think about certain aspects of life, and I think that giving the book a chance may also give the opportunity for a self-reflection for other readers. The book also shows that life isn't always perfect, or in this case, good. It shines light on the harsh reality that at the end of the day, life is not permanent, and that there will not always be the best people around us. However, our perspective on life may make the difference, just as it did for Yozu and for Osamu Dazai. Thanks for watching.